All right, we're about to take a journey. But forget the grand palaces and the pristine drawing rooms of Victorian England. We're going somewhere else entirely. We're going down into the muck of the streets, the filth of the sewers, and the crushing poverty of the slums. We're going to explore the hidden world of Victorian London, and our guide on this trip is the incredible pioneering journalist Henry Mayhew, whose work, London Labor and the London Poor, gives a voice to people who had been silenced for centuries. So let's get started.
This quote right here, it just says it all, doesn't it? It comes from the famous writer William Makepeace Thackeray, and he wrote it after reading Mayhew's work. It's basically a confession of, well, of willful ignorance. Because the shocking, desperate, and weirdly fascinating world we're about to dive into, it wasn't happening in some far-off land. It was right there, literally just outside the doors of respectable society. A few steps away, but a completely different universe. And that's exactly where we're going to begin our tour, in this place that Mayhew called the undiscovered country. It's this idea that the poor weren't just other citizens. They were a completely alien population, a tribe as unknown to the wealthy Londoner as any you'd find on a distant continent. What Mayhew did, it was truly radical for his time. He wasn't some academic sitting in an office looking at statistics. In fact, there were no statistics. These people, the street folk, the scavengers, they were so far off the grid, the government didn't even bother to count them in the census. They were invisible. So Mayhew went directly to them. He sat with them, he walked with them, and he recorded their stories, as he put it, in their own unvarnished language. This wasn't some dry government report. He even called his publication a blue book for the people themselves, a bit of a jab since blue books were usually stuffy official parliamentary reports. But this one, it was published in cheap two-penny pamphlets, so the very people in its pages could afford to read their own stories. Okay, so let's move to our first stop. And I have to warn you, our journey begins at the absolute rock bottom of the social ladder. We're entering a world where survival itself is scavenged from whatever the great city of London throws away. This is life from refuse. So first up, meet the mudlarks. Mayhew described them as the most deplorable in appearance. And yeah, you can see why. Just try to picture it. These are little kids, some as young as 5 or 6, and the very, very old, and they spend their days wading up to their middles in the toxic, stinking sludge of the River Thames at low tide. This isn't just mud, mind you. It's a foul mix of industrial waste, raw sewage, and anything else the city decided to dump. They are just grimed with this filth, their clothes nothing more than tattered rags, literally stiffened with layers of dry dirt. And what are they looking for? Anything. Tiny scraps of coal, bits of old rope, maybe a dropped piece of iron. But the real prize, the thing they all hoped for, was copper nails that had fallen from the ships. Just let that sink in for a second. Read those words. This is a quote from a young boy that Mayhew interviewed. This kid had been caught stealing some coal from an empty barge and was sentenced to 7 days in jail, the House of Correction. And for this child, prison was a vacation. The state's official punishment was a welcome relief from his freedom. Think about that. Prison wasn't a punishment, it was an escape. It was a place where he got to wear a coat and shoes, a place where he got plenty to eat, luxuries he could only dream about on the filthy riverbank. This one single, absolutely heartbreaking statement tells you everything you need to know about how desperate their lives were. Okay, so let's pull ourselves out of the toxic mud of the river and move on to the filthy cobblestones of the streets, where we find the bone grubbers. Picture them, just as the sun is coming up, hunched over with a sharp, spiked stick in one hand and a greasy bag in the other. They're sifting through these huge piles of ash and household garbage that were just heaped in the gutters. And they're looking for anything they can sell to a rag and bottle shop. Rags were okay, bits of metal were even better. But their actual food, their daily sustenance, often came from the huge, stale lumps of bread thrown out by the rich households. Mayhew nets that they would just pluck these dirty crusts directly from the filth and eat them right there on the spot. And if you can believe it, there's a level of desperation that's maybe even more grim. These are the cigar end finders, mostly little children. They would literally follow wealthy men who were smoking, just waiting for them to toss away the stub of their cigar. An entire morning spent doing this might, if they were lucky, get them a penny. A single penny. And what does that penny buy?
oatmeal, which they then take home and boil with other filthy, hardened crusts of bread they've also scavenged from dustbins. And this foul stew was often the only meal an entire family would have to eat for the whole day. Okay, so let's climb just one tiny rung up the ladder. We're moving from pure scavenging, from living off of what's thrown away, to the world of the street sellers. This was a vibrant, chaotic, and incredibly diverse economy, where thousands of people tried to carve out a living not from refuse, but from hustle. The sheer scale of this street economy is just staggering. I mean, this slide just scratches the surface. Mayhew's lists go on for pages and pages. This isn't just about selling apples and fish. It's everything you could possibly imagine. You could buy egg boilers, sieves, padlocks, steel pens, baskets, even religious medals, all right there on the pavement. The source material called it a kind of working-class version of the Great Exhibition, and that's a perfect description. It's this chaotic, sprawling temple to buying and selling anything and everything. But here's the crazy thing. Just because you were selling to the world didn't mean you knew anything about the world. Mayhew interviewed a costermonger, that's a street seller of fish and vegetables, who had actually once served the Prince of Naples. So Mayhew asks him, where is Naples? And this was his reply. His entire world was just the London streets. To him, Euston Square wasn't a gateway to Europe. It was just the place you'd go to ask about train fares. His geographical knowledge was basically zero. His world was only as big as the distance he could walk in a day. And this next exchange, man, it just drives the point home with this brutal, almost darkly funny clarity. When Mayhew asks him about Jesus Christ our Redeemer, the man's mind doesn't go to salvation or faith or the Bible. Nope. It goes straight to the pawn shop. My uncle's was common slang for the pawnbroker. For him, the word redeem had only one meaning, a very real, very practical meaning, getting his best Sunday clothes out of hock. Abstract concepts like theology, that was a luxury he just couldn't afford when the most pressing reality was getting his coat back. So our tour is about to take a darker turn. Because for many, the hustle of the streets wasn't enough. It didn't pay. So they turned to another kind of trade. Let's move deeper into the underworld, into the world of the pickpocket and the thief, and see exactly how it all operated. Now this comes from a detective's direct observation, and it shows that street theft wasn't just some random, clumsy act. It was a professional operation. It was coordinated. You had a team, often a man, a woman, and a young boy, all working together. The man acts as the spotter, pointing out the target or the mark. The woman acts as a lookout and creates a distraction, and the small, nimble boy is the one who moves in close. It was this practiced, methodical dance of deception and theft played out over and over again on the city's crowded streets. So how does a kid get started in a life of crime? Well, this first-hand account from a young thief shows us the slippery slope. It wasn't some big, dramatic, evil decision. It started with a petty grudge. A baker offended him over some bread. Then an older, more experienced thief, B, saw an opportunity. He showed him the move, flared it, he says, which means to just whisk the handkerchief out of a pocket. And in that one single moment, a boy becomes a thief. That first act earned him 1 shilling and 3 pence, which was a huge amount of money for him. And just like that, a new dangerous career path was forged. But life, even in these conditions, wasn't all just work and crime. Even in the darkest corners of London, people needed entertainment. They needed an escape. So how did the London poor amuse themselves? Well, as we're about to see, their diversions were often just as grim and desperate as their daily lives. According to one of Mayhew's informants, this is what the people wanted. You might think they'd want comedy or lighthearted fantasy. Nope. They loved lurid, violent stories, especially when they were based on real crimes. A sensational murderer like this guy James Rush wasn't just a criminal. He became a celebrity, a true crime superstar. One street performer, a guy they called a patterer, said he lived on the story of that one murder for a month or more. And here we see this profound and really heartbreaking disconnect. On one hand, you have the audience's experience, the performance. Mayhew describes this awful rush of costermongers and laborers to the theater gallery, so excited for a good murder piece they'd line up for hours. But on the other hand, you have the stark hidden reality for the performer, the deep personal pain of the very person who's providing that bloody escape. This quote, man, this one is just devastating. It's from a street clown, a man whose job it is to be funny, confessing this to Mayhew. Just imagine the emotional toll. Being forced to jump around, sing silly songs, and act like a fool to earn a few pennies, all while your own life is falling apart inside. This same clown told Mayhew that the day before his wife gave birth, he worked for 12 hours straight in the pouring rain. He brought home 1 shilling and 3 pence to a house with no food and no fire.
And for these entertainers, there was no happy ending. The very people who provided a moment of escape from misery for others were almost always destined for it themselves. The workhouse, that dreaded institution for the destitute, was the final act for most of them. The clown's last words to Mayhew are just chilling. "I can't say what I think will be the end of me. I daren't think of it, sir." It's a testament to the profound hopelessness that was always lurking just behind that painted smile.
Henry Mayhew's journey into the underworld was, at its heart, an act of revelation. He wanted to make the invisible visible. He wanted to teach one half of the world how the other half lived, and all too often, how they died. His work forces us to look at the parts of our own society that we'd much rather ignore. And that, well, that brings us to a final, pretty uncomfortable thought, doesn't it? More than 170 years later, in our own cities, who are the people we don't count? Who makes up our undiscovered country today?